Hey there, YouTube. Welcome to Big Mike Beard Wisdom. So today, we're talking a little bit about valve cover gaskets, because in a lot of vehicles, it's one of the more common gaskets that'll leak. And depending on the engine, it's one of the easier ones to do, but there can be some tricks to them that can make or break whether or not your seal works when you're done with it, especially if you wind up doing it yourself. So if you look at this head here, you can see there's some sharp angles here and there, and also rather aggressive corners. So the way that comes up and goes around right here, so as this comes up, makes that sharp turn, comes around. Same thing with these corners. So if we take a quick look at the valve cover, you can kind of see they had silicone there in the kind of like that sharp corner, and silicone there to help ensure that that forms a good seal. And whenever you get a gasket in, it's not always nicely laid out. So like this, it's all wrapped up and vacuum sealed down, so it's all every which way and direction. And whenever you go to put that on, it may or may not make good contact. Before you go about tackling a valve cover job, what you may want to do is do a little bit of research, see what you can find out as far as what you need parts-wise and tool-wise to make sure you can actually get the job done. And then, whenever you go to order parts, you'll know that, hey, not only do I need my valve cover gasket, but I also need some silicone sealant or gasket maker. And in case there's any kind of special tools that you need, which for the Astra, they use funny E-Torx heads compared to most US vehicles that use like standard bolts. And there's a lot of different silicones out there. So one of the dealerships I worked at, they swore up and down about Toyota Black RTV being the best RTV in the world. And then when I was at a GM dealer, they swore about the GM Gray RTV being the best RTV in the world. So it's all kind of one of those things where maybe there's a little bit of a difference between them. It may just be the identifying color. That way they know that, you know, if it's gray, then it was done at a GM dealership. Whereas if it's black, it was done somewhere else and may or may not be up to warranty level repairs. But let's say you've got some sitting around and you think it's going to be all good and fine and dandy. You need to be careful, because sometimes this stuff gets away from you. So even though I had this tip plugged, everything inside the tip hardened. And even right there, it's all sealed up. So I can give this a good squeeze and nothing comes out. Now a lot of times what you can do is you can take something and jam it down inside and break through that little bit of a seal. And you'll still have good stuff inside, especially if it still moves like it should and compresses. So it's got good silicone on this backside. It's just that it's plugged up somewhere in here. So don't always think that the silicone that you had is either bad now, or that the silicone that you had is going to be perfect because you had something stuck in the tip and it should be good. So I just dug into it a little bit. You can see we've got good silicone there. So it should be good to go with this RTV. Then next up, let's talk surface prep. So you want to make sure that your sealing surfaces are as clean as possible. And to do that, a lot of times I just use a little bit of brake clean on a rag to wipe everything down and get a clean, like oil-free surface. I haven't done that here yet, and you can kind of see there's just a little bit around the edges, and more so over here where it's got a little bit like an oily mess over here. And then same thing with the valve cover itself. So it's got these little trays the gasket sits in. And what I'll do is I'll run that rag through with just a little bit of brake clean. And I've already sprayed the entire valve cover down to clean it out. And you can even see the old RTV. But depending on how it seals, you want to make sure you get everything. So especially like your spark plug holes You want to make sure that that's nice and clean too, because that's an important sealing surface. I got that all wiped down. It's nice and clean. There are a little bit of like build-up areas, so this really isn't that much to be concerned about, but I do like to get it nice and clean and gone. And there's different ways to do it, and some guys will use gasket scrapers. These work fine, normally. Just have to be careful not to gouge the metal. Some people use like cleaning discs or sanding discs and stuff. Those work really well, but you just have to be careful because some vehicles can have extremely tight tolerances, and that little bit that you take off, if you take it off unevenly, can cause a seal problem later. But for this, I'm just going to use my favorite tool, and that's just a clean new razor blade like this. Using this, it's really hard to gouge the metal with it, especially when you're just holding it in your hand. And using a clean one ensures that you don't have any weird, crazy nicks and gouges in the blade already that you can transfer into the soft aluminum. But you just have to be careful with it and go slowly, especially if you're not wearing any kind of protective gloves and stuff, because you can definitely slip, catch something, and cut yourself. Same thing for the edges. So depending on the head, they can have very sharp edges on the inside and outside. So you need to be kind of careful of that. So, as you can see, with a razor blade, you can get this pretty clean. It's fairly simple, you just have to be careful how you do it, because you don't want to hook into the metal at all. And then with a nice clean surface, you're pretty much ready to start going back together. And next is the fun part, trying to make this mess look like a gasket. So a lot of times, these will have little indexing fingers. So if you look at this one, you can see right there, there's this little notch here. That little notch there goes right inside of here. And a lot of times as you go to do this, especially because it's been jammed into a packaging in a weird shape, it'll jump out from where it was. And then there's also these little tensioning fingers here, which can help to hold it in place. Then here's another set of indexing ones. So you want to try and just get it down and in place. That way it's in there nice and relaxed, not overly stretched. If it's overly stretched, maybe see if you can reroute it a little bit. So if there's something where, you know, it seems like you're pulling from one side to get the other one, maybe you need to stretch out somewhere else. But I'll get this all snapped in real quick. All right, so that's all in place now. It was a little weird, kept popping out, but I finally got it. Now, the big thing was that you kind of saw there was a little bit of silicone that was on here, and there's still a little bit there, which is fine because the sealing surface isn't where that little bit of silicone is left. So everything else where it actually seals to is nice and clean. And what we need to do now is replicate that sealant. So in these corners, we're going to put a big dab in those corners. And when I say big dab, I mean maybe about the size of that head bolt. So not a tremendous amount, but we're also going to put just a little bit all around the head. Even though it was pretty clean when it came in and didn't appear to have it, I'm going to do that just because sometimes it's one of those things where it's a little bit of cheap insurance to make sure that everything's nice and perfect. Plus, it's kind of how I was taught to do it, so it's kind of a force of habit for me. And whenever you do it, you always want to make sure you got hopefully a glove or paper towels ready, because this can make a pretty good mess. And then we'll start with the corner real quick. Oh. Once I get it all worked up and out. And it's kind of like icing a cake. I say, even though I've never iced a cake. Alright, ran into a little bit of technical difficulties. There's a small hole right there in my silicone. So, I'm just gonna try and squeeze like all the dickens to try and get it past it and see how it goes. Hopefully, no, it's all coming out right there. So to make this easy, we're gonna forego the tip. We're just gonna put a big old blob right there in the corner. And then a big old blob up here in the corner. And then just a little bit in a couple spots, because we'll smear it out and smooth it out later. Now, if you're doing just a little bit of like an insurance kind of dab of this stuff, you don't need a lot. You just need enough that it kind of creates like a bit of surface tension. And then the big ones in the corner we'll leave nice and solid. The ones here, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll smooth her out. That way, as it goes down and around these ridges, it's got something nice and simple to stick to. But there's still a good buildup in that corner. And even this is a bit much, so I may wind up smoothing this down a little bit more even still. Any sharp corners like this is a good candidate for doing this on, just to make sure that sharp corner seals up good. And you want to avoid getting it on the bolt holes. You also want to avoid getting it on any of the internal components. So like right there what I got on the cam, I'll need to clean that off later. Get it? No, probably should use a paper towel. So, let it get smoothed out just a little bit more, and then we'll go ahead and we'll drop the actual valve cover gasket on top, or the valve cover with the gasket. But something I forgot to go over was that you may not want to do this just because if you end up getting any kind of extra silicone inside that squishes in and it breaks off, it can travel around in your engine and cause problems. And especially for vehicles like GM vehicles where they have the variable valve timing. So these have little small screens in the actual solenoid covers. So there's the solenoid, and you can see that little screen. Just a little bit of dirt or other junk that can get on that will cause problems. So having a small piece of silicone break loose, even just a little whisper of a hair of silicone, and land on this can cause problems. So it's one of those things where you'll have to weigh out whether or not it's a risk you want to take. You can help ensure that there's no problems by making sure that everything's clean on the inside. And that you don't have any excess anywhere, because this is all fairly thin. Just enough that it kind of hides the color of the metal. So this isn't super thick and goopy. So once you get your valve cover in place, the next thing would be to start your bolts. And the biggest thing with the bolts is that you want to start them by hand. Now that can mean either grabbing the bolt head with your fingers itself or using a tool like this just to start it. So basically this is just an extension with the socket on it. And then like I said, this is an E10. So an E-Torx, so external Torx, 10 size. And the reason why you want to start them by hand is because if you start them by hand, then at least you know that it's taking the thread properly and that you're not cross-threading it. Whereas if you just ran it in with a tool real quick, there's a slight chance you can cross-thread it and wind up breaking the bolt and creating problems for the next guy. Which may be you. So don't always think, well, I'm not going to be that guy. Because just when you think, oh, we should be perfectly fine, I'm all good, that's when something weird will happen. You're like, oh, I got to take that back off. And then normally there's a pattern to how to do these. So it may say tighten from the center first and then move outward. This one's going to require my fingers because it feels like it wasn't taken. I may need to wiggle a little bit to find where to go. Alright, so this one back here was just a little funny. So that little collar, that little metal piece inside that plastic housing was kind of pushed up. All I did was tap it down lightly. It went back down and now I can feel the bolt taking the thread like it should. So that's good to go. And then a good step to do is to kind of take an inspection mirror, or in this case your phone, and just kind of take a quick peek so you can kind of see right there the aluminum in the head, the plastic of the valve cover, and you see that little black rubber. So we know the gasket's still in place right there, and then there's that little bit of sealant right there. So we should be good there. You can see down there a little bit of that corner sealant seeped out a little bit. So just like what it had on the factory or on the earlier job. Same thing with this one. You can see a little bit. Where am I looking? Oh, yep. So same thing with this one. You can see a little bit of that sealant seeping out. And then you can see the gasket in place. You can see this is pretty dirty because I'm pretty sure the gasket was leaking here. Otherwise, it's possible that cam phaser solenoid was leaking as well, which I'll get this good and cleaned up once this is all set up and it has time to like dry and cure. Same thing with the rest of the front of the engine. So I'm pretty sure that cooler's leaking because it's a nightmare down here. That's all in place now. It's all tightened up. The big thing with tightening these down is that if you don't know what the torque spec is, and you don't have a torque wrench, you really need to try and make sure that you're careful with it. Because especially for this particular vehicle, it's a plastic valve cover with a metal insert to help support it. And then you're tightening the bolt into an aluminum head. So it doesn't need a ton of torque on these. And over torquing it will only cause problems. So you'll probably easily strip the head out. So being the head, the actual component, if you over tighten these, and then normally if you use a little bit of RTV or you use silicone sealant and stuff like that, it's best to let it sit for a bit to let it cure and flash. That way it's all good to go before starting the vehicle. That way it doesn't get diluted down with the oil or washed off with the oil, and it has time to actually set up. This is all pretty much back together. Valve cover's on, nice and tight. And then the big thing is to always remember that you need to finish doing whatever was originally hooked up. So there's this little hose back here on the Astra. So we need to make sure that's slid forward all the way, and then its caps down. That way it's locked in place. Then this thing here has these little stands that just snaps onto. And there's 3 of them going down this back side. Whoop. This one's not want to play. Did you get in? And down we go. All right. So all those are now in place. Then same thing with this. So this goes just on top of that one there. This one goes on top of that one there. Pushes down. This plugs into the coil pack for the spark plugs, so that can stay out. And then this back here, this wire loom just sits down here in this little valley. So that's all good to go. All in all, valve cover gaskets aren't overly complicated. It's just a sealing surface that you need to make sure is nice and clean. And then if you do wind up using silicone, you want to make sure it has plenty of time to set up, which could mean just a matter of minutes, could mean a matter of hours. Or like this, be like a matter of days. And valve covers tend to be easier to do on 4 cylinders because they're a little bit more easy to get to. They're not like a V6 where one's in front and pretty easy to do, and the other one's tucked in the back and kind of a pain in the butt. You just need to know what kind of tools you need and what kind of parts you need. You need to make sure everything's nice and clean when you do it. You need to decide whether or not you're going to do a little bit of extra silicone as insurance or not. And go ahead and jump into the job. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll check you next time. You can see, whoop, there went the wrench.